And good evening and welcome to RECON Radio Ministries. I am your host, Mark Fauner, and glad you guys are with us tonight. What a Tuesday. Boy, I tell you, it has been swamped. We have got a great show for you tonight. We have a friend of ours once on again to hopefully get through one of our interesting topics, which was the proof of God. And this is Dennis Miller from Adelaide, and I think I actually pronounced it correctly that time, didn't I, Dennis?
You got it right back, yes.
He is from Adelaide, Australia, joining us via Skype tonight, and we certainly appreciate Dennis's insight and all that. Hey, just a couple quick things we want to run over with you. One, we really appreciate Brother Larry and all the people behind the scenes at WTVO Radio. We had, it was a 3 Men in the Bible program. The other night we had a couple technical issues, but seemed to have worked through that. And just appreciate Larry and Jason and Barry. And was an interesting show from what I gathered. I got booted out for some reason, some technical issue. And it took me about 10-15 minutes to get back in. But praise God, looks like everything's been worked out. But a couple things in the news, and then we'll get started in on our program tonight. I hope you guys are doing well. There has been, we live in such a bad day, but a lady by the name of Miranda Barber, she is a young lady that is known as the Craigslist killer. She and her husband put out ads on Craigslist for sex, and when the guys showed up, they took them out someplace and killed them. According to her recent claim in the news, she actually started this when she was 13 years old as part of some satanic cult in Alaska. She is estimated to have killed 22 people. That's by her own admission, because she said after 22 she stopped counting. What a sick individual. And this story will be with us for years. It will take, quite literally, probably at least 2 to 3 years to track down the various leads. But she told someone that if they would give her a map, she could point to the places where the bodies are exactly. Just really, really bad. Pray for her salvation, because there's still salvation in Christ for her, but man, she's got a long way to go in that regard. She is awaiting trial, and it is just, it's not going to be good for her. She's already admitted to it, and her and her husband both. So they are, the prosecution is seeking the death penalty in those cases. And please don't get me wrong on this, but this is kind of on the light side of the war with the jihadists around the world. But a suicide bomber instructor in Iraq apparently was practicing and blew himself and the entire class of would-be terrorists up in Baghdad. Just a note, you don't practice suicide bombing. You either do or you don't. But apparently destroyed the entire facility. 21 bombers were killed. And there's some civilians that were wounded outside, and the authorities there are actually saying that this is probably one of the better things that have happened, because there's at least 1,000 people will be alive because these guys aren't going off and lighting themselves up like candles. This is unbelievable. One other note in the news, and this is something that will basically sicken you if you were a member of the armed services, especially in the Navy. But the country of Iran, we know that they have hacked into a non-confidential website of the U.S. Navy and had been there apparently for quite a while. And they just were found out in October and thrown out of the net. Somehow, some way, they have, in fact the story is from Fox, that the Iranian hacking of the U.S. Navy computers reportedly was more extensive than first thought. Just this one thing should make us stand up and question some things. The paper noted that the hackers were able to remain in the network until, past November. I thought it was October, it was November. That contradicts what officials told the Journal, that's the Wall Street Journal, when the attack was first publicly reported last September. At the time, officials told the paper that the intruders had been removed. That was not the case. The case is they were not removed for at least 2 to 3 months later. On that same general thing, the Iranians announced as well that there was no condition of them removing, dismantling, or tearing apart any of their 20,000 plus centrifuges in Iran. It was not going to dismantle any of its nuclear machinery, which is in direct violation to what they agreed with just a few months ago. So that leaves us with a big, huge hole, which I'm sure the country of Israel would be more than happy to fill, if not create. So be praying for that situation, because that would quite literally, if they're stalling, and I know a man who spent a large amount of time in the Middle East, and one of the things he told me is if an Iranian is stalling, he's just stalling long enough to reload his gun. And I always thought that was a great metaphor. So we need to be seriously in prayer for that area over there, because that could turn into a hotbed literally at any time. I'm not trying to scare you, but this is just part of what's going on in the world today. And it's amazing to me, Dennis, how how people can go through life, claim that there's nothing out there, that nothing existed before this, and that when you die, there's nothing going to happen to you, and you're just going to return to the stardust that you were created from.
Yes, it's one of the great philosophical arguments, I guess, certainly the modern times, and I guess it probably has been throughout history. And it's really the topic, I guess, of what we're trying to get to the root of tonight, as to how you convince people of that. And it's an interesting question.
Well, it is.
But on this question of Iran and the Middle East, we don't want to sidetrack the show, but
No, I understand.
I am watching it very, very closely. I really do believe that we are about to see Zechariah chapters 12 through 14, and I guess 12
would be, yeah.
Is the first part, but 14 is the specific thing, which talks about Israel being invaded and half of Jerusalem going into captivity. And it would take us too far, I think, off the track to go into it now, but I really do believe that this question of Iran and these centrifuges, well, not only their centrifuges, the plutonium-producing reactor, or potentially plutonium-producing reactor, is also a part and parcel of this, wrapped up very closely with the situation in Syria.
Yeah.
And I think Syria is sort of the area which is likely to be the real trigger. It's all tied up with Iran, because Iran, of course, is one of the major backers, along with Russia. But I have just had the feeling that we're going to see Syria explode in the near, being in inverted commas, future. I've given up trying to sort of isolate this, because I've been trying to do it so many times. And you think you've got it pegged, you never ever do. But everything that's happened along that path has happened unexpectedly.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
That's what I think we're about to see in the near future again. Another unexpected blow-up. All of this talk of peace, I think, is about to come to a sudden halt. As 1 Thessalonians 5, the first few verses somewhere, when they are talking peace and safety, then sudden destruction will come upon you.
Yeah, you and I both know, you've been in the job that you had beforehand. It doesn't take any more. The genie, as Einstein once said, the genie is out of the bottle. Once they lit off the first nuke at Los Alamos, and it doesn't take an Einstein to build a bomb. It takes time. It takes some knowledge, but it doesn't really take. There's some theoretical physics you need to know, but beyond that, it doesn't take a genius to create one of these things. And one of the things that people are so focused on is Iran. And I think they're focused on the wrong party, because I really believe what you said is true. I think if Syria would go to Syria was close to falling, because Iran is a big backer of Assad, and if that happened, well, I think you would see an entire power shift by Iran into Syria, and then that opens up an entirely different ballgame. And if that happens, like you said, we could speculate on that one for quite a while, but I think we're very, very close.
Yes, I absolutely agree, Matt.
Yeah. Now, on the subject that we tried to get to last week, 2 weeks ago, and we had some technical problems, but it wasn't to us; it was to Skype. But imagine bouncing a signal from Adelaide, Australia, to Ohio in the United States. That's almost as far away from me as you can possibly get, and still be on the planet.
Just about. We're almost exactly diametrically opposite views.
Just about.
And in the southern hemisphere to boot.
Exactly. But, the proof of God, you had some notes. Where did we leave off on this one?
Well, we'd more or less passed through the sort of standard arguments, and we left it pretty much at the point where I was saying that these are not really very satisfying. It's probably worth just recapping on the sort of standard arguments, the major standard arguments that people put, without getting deeply involved in them. We don't want to redo the show. So there were several that I talked about. One was fulfilled prophecy, and we've briefly talked about that with Iran and Syria today, the fact that you can get very accurate statements written in many cases over 4,000 years ago. If you go back to Zechariah, Ezekiel, I believe Ezekiel was about 600 BC or something. Zechariah went back earlier, so you're going back well over 2,500 years. And yet they made statements which pertain to the end times, which we see coming to pass before our eyes. Of course, we have Revelation as well, and we really don't want to get involved there because that would really sidetrack us. So we've got that, but of course a lot of people don't find that persuasive. Non-Christians don't find it persuasive because one of the reasons that they point to is they say, well, look, you have so many different conflicting viewpoints within the church. How can we know which one of you to believe? So that's one of the reasons, but not the only one, that people don't find it persuasive. Then we have the what's called the cosmological argument, and summarising that, it's that everything is the result of a cause and effect. There's a chain of events which go back through time, and the general argument goes, this universe that we live in had to have a cause, and that cause was God. And of course, my argument there was, well, everything in the universe from the birth of the universe forward to this point in time was the result of cause and effect, but that cause was always found in the laws of physics which underlay it. And so we can't absolutely say that our universe, particularly if the idea of the multiverse is true, we can't truly say that our universe didn't have its immediate cause in the existing laws of physics, which somehow or another, still unknown, but quite conceivably within the realm of cause and effect, that the natural laws brought this universe into existence. Now there is obviously a point where you can go back through as many iterations as you like, and you have to come to a final point and say, well look, this really was the beginning. But the problem with that one is also that people can say, well okay, let's just cut the universe off at the beginning of our universe and say the initial cause of that was God. Well then the objection then becomes, well, where did God come from? So it becomes a circular argument, and intellectually it's not satisfying. So then we've got this thing called the ontological argument, which some people believe is, well, philosophically sound. I've got doubts about it, but it essentially goes like this. There's 5 points which define it. Now, the first point is that you define God, and God in the ontological argument is defined to be that which is the greatest thing that a human can conceive of. Its second point says that anything that exists in both a person's mind and in the outside world of reality is greater than something that exists only in the mind. So the third point actually begins to put it into practice, and the third point normally says, well, let's suppose that God exists in the minds of people only, but not in reality. Now, from that, it just automatically follows that if you can conceive of something greater than a God that exists only in the mind, in other words, one that does exist in reality, then by definition that must be greater. And so you go back to the first point, that God is defined as that which you can't think of anything as greater, okay? So the fact that you can conceive of a God that exists in both the mind as well as in reality means that God does exist both in the mind and in the reality around us. Now, it's been argued, I think for a couple of, 2-3 centuries or more since it was first thought up. But the fact that people still argue about it means that it is not a convincing proof. And to me, the thing which would bring it undone is that second point that they make, that something that exists both in the mind and reality is greater than something that exists only in the mind. Now, I'm not sure that there's any proof that that statement is correct. I'm not saying that it's not correct. All I'm saying is that I'm not sure that there's any proof. I've certainly never come across anybody which has put up a proof which says that must be the case. And if that's not the case, then the rest of it all falls down.
Understand.
So that's the problem that you have with that one.
You know, one of the things that I thought and this goes back, oh my word, mid to early 90s, a seminary professor was trying to talk about the existence of God but generally along the same lines of the proof of God. And one of the things he made this statement, and I'm trying to quote him directly, was something akin to God exists in time, through time, and out of time, all at the same time. Is it? And you know, that blew, I think, every one of our minds. Is that, you know, God? You know, we look at God as a stationary being living in heaven that just is on his throne all the time, and I think we fail to really grasp the concept of God being what we would refer to in our mind sets as interdimensional. He exists in the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, 20th, 26th dimension, if there is one, all at the same time. And he can move in and out of these with no issue. What do you say to that?
Absolutely right, yeah.
And, you know, I thought that was a great primer for me as a young seminary student at the time to really cut my teeth on this and say, starting down the pathway of, you know, how does God exist? And that's a question we can't answer. I've studied this for almost 25 years, and the question of how God exists is a question we will never be able to answer. The question.
Well, we're certainly never going to answer it this side of eternity.
Yes. The other side, I still think, and the Bible talks about that there will still be great mysteries that we will never know. But, and that may be one of them. But, you know, I do believe we will understand so much more.
Well, it says somewhere in the New Testament, don't ask me to quote the verse, that we see through a mirror darkly now. Somewhere in Corinthians, if I remember correctly.
I think you're right.
But then we will see it all clearly. So, yes, all these things that we struggle with conceptually today will become clear. See, I think we need to look at this also in this big picture. We've only been around, but in my case, I'm getting a bit ancient now, up into the early 70s, but in cosmic time, that's zilch, nothing.
Yeah.
When we're going to live forever. Now, forever is a seriously long time, as we've talked about briefly before. So, if we are living forever, and we are living in the presence of God, the things that we will know, and do, and see, and experience, it's that verse. Here again, I can't tell you exactly where it was, and I can't even quote it exactly, but it goes along the lines that eye hath not seen, ear hath not heard, nor entered into the heart of man, things that wait those who love the Lord. And I've heard a lot of people comment on that, and they've said, well, you know, that's really saying, look, heaven's going to be beautiful, and it's going to have all these colours that we can't currently see, and that's no doubt true. But I don't really think that that was its base meaning. I think it's talking about the fact that just as people, even 500 years ago, couldn't imagine today's world, so 5,000, 500,000, 5 million, 5 billion years from now, we haven't got any chance at all in beginning to think about the sort of world that we will live in then and what we will know.
Well, you know, time will, talks about time ceasing. By the way, that verse is, but as it is written, what no eye has seen, nor ear has heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love Him, which is a reference back to Isaiah 64:4, but it says virtually the same thing. The key thing here is that we get to live forever, and it is essential that we have a heart for other people, to show them that there really is only one of two places. It's funny, you can break all major religions down. They all believe in the place of punishment. Most of them do. There's a few that don't. All believe that there's a place of punishment. All believe in some form of heaven. What they do not understand and don't conceptualize is that Christ came as John wrote, the propitiation for our sin. He is the only one who could have paid our sin debt for us. And that is such a wonderful proof of who God is. You know, Jesus told the Pharisees and the Sadducees, he even told his disciples this, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. And they were amazed. They were shocked, because this man was speaking blasphemy at this point. In fact, he told the Jewish leaders at the time that before Abraham was, I am. And they picked up stones because they knew exactly what he was claiming to be. He was claiming to be God. And he slipped away because it wasn't his time, nor the method. But, you know, we have a great, as Christians, we have a great emphasis to place upon the person of Christ. And that's one of the things I keep hearing about. You know, the cosmos has been around for 13 plus billion years based on radio telescopic data, and some sort of... Have you ever heard of something called the fusion mass theory?
No. The short answer is no.
I haven't either. And I'm no dingling, but not the sharpest brightest bulb in the box, but I've never heard of that. And it has something stated, and I could never find anything online about it, but I was talking with a guy who claimed to be an atheist. Turns out he was an agnostic, but as most are. And he was talking about this fusion mass theory, where the fusion of several isotopes at once with created mass the universe wasn't strong enough to hold mass, so then you had the Big Bang. And I'm like, that's the most ridiculous theory I've ever heard, because what created the isotopes? And
well, yeah,
you don't know.
You're pushing back into this point, which is largely in the realm of theoretical physics at this time, and we really can't test it. So we sort of know what happened from that point on. There was a massive energy injection, and it was the inverse of the atomic bomb, where the atomic bomb transmutes mass into energy. The creation process was the exact reverse, where energy is transmuted into mass. So really, what we do know is that at the point that the universe began, it began in a stupendous blast of energy. So, look, I don't know where he came up with that idea, because I've certainly never read or heard anyone discussing that one, no.
Yeah, that was weird. You know, what is one of the, in your mind, what's one of the greatest proofs for God?
The greatest proof for God, to me, I think, is in Acts chapter 9. Okay?
Okay.
Let me read it to you. Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground, and he heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" And Paul said, "Who are you, Lord?" And the voice came back, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting," he replied. Now, that to me is the greatest proof that anybody can have. Not just reading that, but for Paul, as he became after that experience, nothing on earth could convince Paul that what he had personally experienced did not happen. People could have argued with Paul, and they did argue with Paul, about what the truth of God was. None of it had any effect on him whatsoever at all. Until he had that personal encounter with Christ. That's what brought him to the realisation in a way that he couldn't prove to anybody else, because you'd be well familiar with the story. Nobody else saw anything. This was an internal experience that he had, insofar as everyone around him was concerned. And it's the same thing for everybody that I know of, and certainly in my case, where I had a personal experience in a way that no one could convince me afterwards. I mean, I've been brought up in the church ever since I was 7 years old. And an intellectual understanding of God was something which I had from a young child. Now, during my teenage years, I went out from the church, and I went away for many years. And during probably my mid-30s, I felt this call to go back to church, and I took my family back. And there was an altar call one night, and I wanted to go out the front But anyone who's ever been out in an altar call will know that it's not easy.
No.
And I felt like a hand in the middle of my back pushed me up and out, and I really didn't have much choice. I was sort of physically propelled. Now, I can't prove that to anybody, okay? Now, I can tell whoever's listening now and whoever I've told in the past, that's not convincing to anybody. But to me, that experience was something deep and profound, and what happened from then on was also deep and profound, but they were internal things. And after that, we continued on in the church again, and then for various reasons, I drifted away again for quite a few years. And it was in 1996 I was admitted to hospital with a heart problem. Now, like most people, particularly if you're a Christian, you have some concept of what you think it will be like to die, right? But it's a vague concept, and you're not really sure whether you believe it or not, but you're really going to survive that point of death. Well, I had to undergo an angiogram as a result of this admission, and because of my muck-up in the notifications, I hadn't been told that angiograms can be extremely dangerous and in fact fatal in some cases.
Yes, they can be.
And you can go into cardiac arrest. So the bottom line is that I went into cardiac arrest for reasons which are still a bit unclear even today from the hospital notes. And I was in arrest for just over 90 seconds. Now, during that 90 seconds, the experience that I had was something that I can't prove to anybody. We had a brief discussion when we were out to tea the other night with someone. He said, "You can't prove that." And I said, "Well, no, of course I can't prove it." I said, "You can't prove to me what you were thinking 5 minutes ago either." And I said, in the same way, I can't prove to you what happened to me that day. But I said, that had a deep and profound effect on me in a way that nothing could ever convince me that I had not found myself outside of my body in a realm which is separated from this physical world, yet still being able to view it back through a small porthole. But I said that experience was as real as I'm sitting here talking and listening to you right now. And as a result of that, I sort of have come right back into a much deeper study of the Bible and a communication with God. But the point that I'm trying to get at really is that all of the intellectual arguments on what it's like to die, whether God exists, in the end really had no effect upon me at all and really didn't convince me of anything. It's only these two experiences, this sort of hand in the back that night, must be well over 40 years ago, and that experience about 17 years ago of cardiac arrest. Now, I can't prove either of those things to anybody, but no argument can shake my belief. And I think that it's really summed up, to me, it's summed up with Jesus' words, well, in Luke, "All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows who the Son is except the Father, and no one knows who the Father is except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him." And it's like this experience with Saul to become Paul. It was a personal experience. God revealed himself to Paul on that day, and from that point on there was a change in Paul's life that nobody can deny. It's effectively everybody in the world just about knows of Paul. And it all came about because of an internal experience he had. And I think that the other verse which comes to mind, and I can't quote it exactly, is that we know God through faith, and faith comes through hearing the Word of God. That's the vehicle that God uses through evangelists to talk to people. People speak those words, they're God-inspired words, people hear them, God works for them, and then God himself reveals himself to that person. And I truly believe that that is the only proof that you can offer.
You know, it's funny that, and this is one of the things I was taught, I'm going to say late 80s when I was first a new Christian and felt the call to the ministry. One of the things that they talked about was this. The greatest proof, the greatest thing that we have in our arsenal, we have, of course, the Bible. We have His Holy Word. We have the Holy Spirit. But one of the more tangible things that we have is our testimony. Because our testimony is something that is irrefutable. This is something that happened directly to us. I have a very similar one. And I will always remember that. That is the time that I knew that God literally touched my body and healed me. My doctor was sleeping in the same room with me with a crash cart, if that's how bad I was. And they told my wife and my daughter that I wouldn't live through the night. And I remember kissing them goodbye forever. I mean, I'll always remember that. And I know that after that experience that I had, and I won't get into it here, but after that experience, I knew that God, that all the stuff that I grew up with Catholicism, and not going to get into all that, but it was a great primer on who God was, who the Trinity was, who Jesus Christ was. And as I went through that, and I went through this, my whole life culminated at this one experience. And after that day, nothing's ever been the same. Doesn't mean I've been perfect. Oh boy. I've performed some real lulus since then. But you know what? I still have that experience. I still have something that no one else can take away from me.
That's the bottom line. As you say, your testimony, because it's in that changed life. Now, most of us don't make a change in the world like Paul did with his change in life. But it's all the same thing. And, yes, we go along, we may intellectually be convinced that God exists, and that's the reasonable thing to do, because I think that it is the reasonable thing to do to believe that somewhere along the line you don't bring into existence a world like this with all its amazing complexity and beauty unless there is some ordering power behind it. Now, how you define that ordering power is many and varied according to most people. So I think it's the wise thing to do that, and I think most people really do have some deep down idea. You hear it with them, and they say, look, there has to be a God. Right? And it goes back to this idea of Calvin's that he believed that everybody had some innate sense that there was a God. He didn't believe, as I understand it, that there were any real genuine atheists. They were all agnostic, and they all had some sort of deep down belief, whether they would publicly admit it or not, that yes, there had to be some ordering entity, power, spirit, God, however they like to define it, behind it all. But those sort of things are not convincing. You can have all the intellectual arguments you like. They are never going to convince anybody, in my opinion. And it's only when somebody reaches a crisis point in their life, or in some cases just out of the blue, like Saul's experience, and to some extent like my experience, because I certainly had no intention of going out the front that night. That sort of didn't cross my mind. So yes, it's that testimony of a changed life is a very convincing argument.
You know, it's amazing, those angiograms. They give you this little piece of paper that basically says, "Here, sign this. If we kill you, it's not our fault." And I've signed those a few times in my own life, and you know, it's just you know, they're really not worth the paper that they're written on, because a good lawyer can pretty much take it all out, but it doesn't help you if you're dead. You know, but it does help your family maybe. But it is amazing to me, though, how simple procedures like that can lead to a life change.
Well, look, I'll just briefly tell you what happened.
You don't have to unless you want to.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It was decided that I may have a blockage, so I had to go down for an angiogram the next morning. But the cardiologist who normally ran the angiography lab was away on holidays. So they were only running the angiography lab as they needed to do it. And as a result, most of the staff down in the lab were put on other duties up in the cardiac ward where I was. So anyway, one of these blokes came into me on the day before, and he introduced himself and explained why he was up there, that, you know, he was temporarily reassigned, and he said, "I see you're on the list for tomorrow morning." He said, "Do you know what's going to happen?" And I said, "Well, not really." So anyway, he sat down and he described the technical aspects of what happens during the angiogram. How they make the incision, put the catheter up in there, up into the heart, and shoot the dye through the heart. But of course, because he wasn't nursing staff, it wasn't his job to tell me about the risks. So come the next morning, as they got me ready, the sister came in and she said, "Now, has somebody been and explained the whole deal to you?" And I said, "Yes, they had." Of course, what she meant was they explained everything and got you to sign the release. I didn't realise that. So off down to the angiography lab, and I'm laying on the table. And for anyone who hasn't had one, you lay out on a table horizontally, and on one side you've got, well, in this particular case there were two monitors, and then you've got the X-ray unit which above and below you, which can then photograph this radio-opaque dye as it goes through your veins in the heart. And I'm lying on the angiography table, and there must have been 7 or 8 people, including the cardiologist who was doing it, on my right side. And I'm just watching the screen, and it's quite interesting to see this dye course through the veins on the heart, and arteries on the heart. And then suddenly it was no warning, no feeling. It was just like the world greyed out. best way of describing it is when you turned off a TV, the old style cathode ray TVs, you used to see the screen shrink down to that bright dot in the middle.
Yep.
Well, this was exactly like that. Over a 2 to 3 second period, the world just sort of greyed out and shrunk down, and no feeling, no nothing. It just happened. And then suddenly, I was awake in what I can only describe as a dark space. Not black, it's sort of like a deep twilight, is the best I can describe it. And I was staggered, amazed. I thought, where am I? And I can still feel this sense of amazement now. Where am I? How did I get here? What am I doing here? And I could see off to one side of me, maybe 10 or 15 feet away, what I can only describe as a barrier. And people have asked me to describe this barrier, and to this day I still can't. It's a barrier that you can't penetrate, but I can't really describe it to you, except in terms of it was like a wall, but it wasn't a wall in the sense that you know. But in this barrier wall, there was what appeared to be a porthole, maybe half a metre long by, I don't know, quarter of a metre, third of a metre high, which was transparent, just like a porthole. Light was coming through it. So I moved over to this, and you can move, not by walking, it was a strange sensation, it was like a gliding sensation, but totally under your control. Moved over, looked through, and I was sort of off to what I saw was that it was as if I was standing on a floor at about the same level as the angiography lab. I was looking back into the angiography lab, and I was at about, if my head was 12 o'clock and feet were 6 o'clock, I was at about the 2 o'clock position, maybe 15 or 20 feet away, and I was watching my body, although it didn't dawn on me to start with that it was my body on the angiography table, plus all the people milling about. And it was only over the next 90 seconds that I sort of realised that I had died. That I was actually outside looking back into what was going on. And then suddenly it was like a giant whirlpool feeling, being sucked into a whirlpool as the heart was restarted, or taken out of VF and then stabilised and restarted again. And I woke up with a woman. She had me by the elbow with her face right up next to mine, and she's saying, "You're safe now." And I said to her, "Did I just go into cardiac arrest?" And she said, "Yes, you did," but she said, "Now you're safe." Now, I never saw anybody in that dark space, and I never heard anybody. I didn't see any bright lights that a lot of people talk about, but I firmly believe that that area is the valley of the shadow of death that is spoken of in the Psalms.
Mm-hmm.
Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death and the grave, I will fear no evil, because there was no fear at all. It was just a feeling of utter amazement. But the critical issue in that is that I can't prove that to anybody, and I don't try and prove it to anybody. People either accept it or they don't, and I understand that, because if somebody told me, I'd probably be inclined not to believe them anyway. Well, that's the reality, Mark, yeah? But the point, the real point that comes out of it is that nobody can convince me that I wasn't fully conscious, just as you and I are now, and that I didn't undergo that experience, and that I now know what it feels like to die, and that absolutely you do survive death. Those who don't think you do, trust me, when you fall through that little trapdoor, you're going to get a huge surprise and a huge shock. And I often think about, because quite a number of people that I know since then have died since that time, and quite a number of them were atheists or agnostics. And I often think, well, gee, I wonder what their response was when they suddenly thought, well, where am I? How did I get here? What am I doing here? And then slowly the realisation dawned, well, gee, I've died.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I think we messed up.
Yeah, well, yes, yeah, but by that time it's a bit on the late side.
Yeah.
You can't say, I want to go back. So, really what I'm getting at is that I personally don't think intellectual arguments cut the mustard. I think it's only experiences. And you don't have to go through a cardiac arrest. Like you had an experience, and I had an experience, all had an experience, and I think if you talk to anybody who claims that they're a Christian, a born-again Christian, I think they will all tell you the same thing. I can point to an actual experience that changed my life.
And you know the ones that scare me most, Dennis? And people will be shocked about this a little bit. But as a minister, one of the things, you're introduced to people, and one of the things that people instantly, well, one, they start apologizing for the language, but the other is, I always find that amusing. But the other piece is, they always come up with this, well, I've been a Christian all my life. No, you haven't. You've
been a nominal Christian.
You weren't born a Christian. You become a Christian.
Oh, yeah, okay, I'm with you, yeah.
There's this life that you live, and then you find Christ, and then there's this conversion, and you move on from there. And I'm not saying everybody has to have this marvelous, wonderful experience that you and I shared. Not that I would ever want either one of us to repeat that. But at the same point in time, there is, because some people just bow their head and accept Christ for who He really is. And that's a wonderful thing. And they don't have to go through what I used to call God's 2x4. That's one of my first sermons I ever wrote, by the way. But these people who come up and well, I think, if you don't have an experience, if you cannot point to a date or a day or a year that you met and accepted Christ, then, now some people just can't remember, and I understand that if you're up in age, that's one thing. But some people, who are saying these things are fairly young people, and I mean young from 80 on down, and if you can't point to an experience level, you really need to take a look at the walk that you're on. Because, like it or not, one day, as Dennis has said, you're going to fall through that trapdoor. And, I can't remember who said it, but, I believe with 100% certainty that none of us get off the planet alive.
That was my wife that said that originally. That one. Lynn often says that. None of us are getting out of this place alive.
Well, it has gone around the world a few times then.
I must tell her. She's not here at the moment. I'll tell her that her saying has gone around the world.
There you go. And and as a result of that, we have got to have a relationship with Jesus. He said He was the only way. And, His disciples, even if you don't believe me and you don't believe Dennis, look at what the disciples were going through right after the crucifixion. They were afraid. They were cowering literally in the upper room with the windows boldly closed and the doors with big, huge logs on them, because they were terrified that what just happened to their master would happen to them. And then in comes Mary, and she's knocking at the door. Let me in, let me in. I just saw the Lord. They thought she was nuts. They thought she had lost it. And then what happens? He appears to them in the middle of the locked room, locked doors, locked windows. And I think there is such a beautiful message in that, is that if we follow that and we believe that, which I do, and I know Dennis does, everything else just falls in the line. Everything else just falls into a level of peace. And you know what? That's where we hope that you are listening out there tonight. We hope that you have that peace. We hope that you have that understanding that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and life, that no man comes unto the Father except through Him. Those aren't my words. Those are the words of Jesus Himself. And it is absolutely amazing how things come together. And Dennis, I appreciate you being on tonight, brother. Really do.
Thank you very much indeed for asking me, Mark. I've enjoyed it.
Well, I'm glad you enjoy it. We appreciate you being on here. You'll be on here again. I'm sure we will have other topics to go through. Once again, my name is Mark Fonner. This is RECON Radio Ministries. You can reach me at RECON Radio on Facebook. You can reach me at RECON Radio Ministries, that's all one word, at gmail.com. If you have any ideas or suggestions for the program, love to hear about them. And with that, we certainly appreciate you guys being with us tonight. And thank you, and good night.